Conrad Banks, the Senior Director for WWHEOR Strategy and Operations. And Conrad is here with us. For those of you who don't know, WWHEOR is Worldwide Health Economics Outcomes Research Strategy and Operations. That's what that abbreviation stands for. He is a global strategy and operation leader with 22 years of experience driving organizational transformation in highly complex and cross-functional matrix environments. And we know the challenges that we all have in those types of environments. Conrad started his career in financial services at Deloitte Consulting, working on acquisitions and cost reduction engagements. Today, he is the Senior Director of WWHEOR Strategy and Operations, where he has led large-scale innovation and technology initiatives, enhancing capabilities in the global medical and HEOR business units. Conrad, it's a real gift to have a cross-industry leader of excellence in innovation and transformation like you, sharing your wisdom and expertise with our global audience today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jose. It's a pleasure. So I want to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some. I know that this is a global audience. And, thank you, Jose, for that great introduction. One of the things that I wanted to share is I do have the benefit of having worked in large-scale engagements on the digital side from a financial as well as from a pharmaceutical perspective. And you wouldn't be surprised to see the amount of commonality that exists across the two. The previous panel really did a great job in terms of talking about where digital process automation fails, but I'd like to kind of turn that on its head and talk a little bit about, how these types of engagements can achieve optimal results. I don't know if am I showing my screen?
Your camera's on now. It looks good. Everything looks good.
Excellent. Okay. So let's talk a little bit. We all recognize that technology and the use of digitization continues to drive new process innovations. That's understood. This obviously spans industries. There's general agreement that the efficiencies to be gained will vastly improve operations and workload challenges and significantly improve bottom lines in terms of OpEx. But there are some critical elements that are required to ensure that these benefits are realized. So what I'm going to spend some time over the next 25-30 minutes is really talking about some real-world case studies and some of my observations and experiences that I'd like to share with you. We'll look at some specific elements, and then we'll follow it up with a good Q&A. So look forward to this presentation and ultimately the discussion. So the first element that I wanted to talk about will be the definition of the strategic vision. I think one of the things that I heard in the previous panel was the importance of leadership buy-in and strategic alignment. But the fundamental question of what are we trying to solve for is critical. The next element is really around the importance of building integrated platforms. What does it truly mean to demonstrate an enterprise level mindset as these systems are developed? The third really focuses around developing, effective change management strategies. All too often this gets discounted or, injected end of engagement as opposed to really being thought out carefully at the onset. And then the last is the importance of establishing solid metrics and measurements for success. And I think that that's one of those elements that you start thinking about at the beginning in terms of what defines success, and then subsequently really getting into the details of what are those measurements and how do we leverage that to achieve continuous improvement to ensure not only adoption, but ultimately sustainability. So if you look at this particular visual, I pulled this out because I wanted folks to really appreciate that what we're trying to do is land in the digital process automation drop zone. This is that optimal area where we realize operational efficiencies, OpEx cost savings, customer and end user satisfaction, and where we enhance organizational culture. Teams really must employ these various key elements in order for them to be successful. Decisions made to embark on digital process automation must synergistically tie in with the broader enterprise level initiatives as well as the broader ecosystem. So we're always shooting for the drop zone. And so let's stop for a second and think. Many digital process automation engagements are unsuccessful due to a lack of strategic alignment. The fundamental question of what exactly are we trying to solve for? So a key element in the failure of digital process automation is that lack of strategic alignment. Many projects are established to address an unmet need, understandably, but they don't necessarily align with the broader business or digital strategy. That's something that folks need to take a step back and think about. Executive sponsors and business owners should ask the fundamental questions. What are we trying to solve for? And does this align with our organizational strategy? Asking these questions before a full commitment of resources takes place can result in saving significant budget as well as resource hours. So I want to take my first pause and talk about a case study. So during the course of my 20 some odd years, I've been on some very interesting large-scale cross-regional, cross-functional engagements. One of these efforts focused on building a global insights engine. And that global insights engine was going to be used to facilitate better decision-making at the leader level. The program was IT funded and consisted of a training, IT data architecture team, a process team, and a people team to really look at the organizational culture component. This particular engagement had over 100 resources assigned to it, with the focus of really transforming the way insights were conducted, the way they were
Conrad,
captured.
just a quick check. We all only see your first slide. Is that what you meant, to only show your first slide, or you have moved to additional slides? Because we cannot see that. We're still seeing the first slide.
That's interesting. Okay, I did move on to my next slide.
Now I can see case study number 1. Yeah, now I can see it.
Excellent. Okay, all right. I hope everyone didn't miss the wonderful digital, the visual of the drop zone. So this
We
is what
missed that. We missed that.
Oh man! Oh my gosh! So
Yes,
this is the drop zone.
Thank you.
So this is the drop zone. So let's talk about the case study, right? So the case study was interesting because the reason why it was such a challenge was each of those functional teams that I described as part of the engagement, they were focusing and prioritizing on their respective areas and working in a siloed fashion towards this new process and new system that we were integrating. The team initially showed some progress, but they were still placing the overall engagement in jeopardy as a result of working in such a siloed fashion. What really brought it together was my ability to focus the teams on an aligned global strategic imperative, right? The importance of having insights that could lead to actionable decision-making that led to results for the business. So each part recognizing that their respective areas contributed to the whole. The real lesson here is anchoring teams on a primary strategic focus unlocks both productivity and innovation. As a result, despite the high complexity and the numerous stakeholders involved, the initiative was achieved on time, on budget, building revamped processes and a sophisticated insights engine to meet business objectives. So I want to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, pardon the pun. So many times digital process automation projects fall short by not integrating critical systems to create a seamless end user experience. A true enterprise mindset knows how to connect the dots on the technical architecture to determine how each system will effectively interface and migrate data from one point to another. Whether you're applying an agile method or doing BDUF, big development up front, there are system connectivity requirements and discussions that IT, data, the business analytics, and the business owners should clarify before completing the build. So this is an essential element. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a great system get developed, but all the conversations that should have been had with the peripheral system owners, the systems that will feed into new system, how often that creates roadblocks, challenges, to the point where the end user is unable to effectively move from awareness to adoption to sustainability. And so we understand that building integrated platforms is a key to achieving optimal results. So let me talk a little bit about, another case study that I had relative to this idea of integrated systems, where this was focused on a global contracting system. And in this global contracting system, the effort was focused on improving contracting cycle times and creating greater efficiencies in the statement of work / budget development process. Big deal for an enterprise that's doing millions and millions of dollars, but so important, especially when you think about the end results are contingent upon having statements of work that are executed on time. All of that work really just doesn't really matter if you can't get the contract out the door, if you can't establish a purchase order or service order number to get started. This program was also funded by IT and had stakeholders from the business. You had change management, you had training, you had IT, data, architecture, process, as well as the procurement organizations. The challenge here was that there were significant challenges relative to the new system, as I mentioned earlier, connecting those processes that were developed outside as well as embedded within the system, while they were all well and good, didn't necessarily speak to other peripheral systems that had been either inexistent or newly launched. As a result, we had data migration issues. We had an inability to effectively train our teams, because while they were trained on the new system that we were launching, they didn't really understand the points of connectivity with the existing systems in the enterprise. So the importance of understanding the interface, how contract systems talk to other systems, is a key element. Certain process and workflow gaps were also uncovered, and workarounds had to be developed to ensure business continuity. Project teams really need to adopt an enterprise mindset in delivering digital process automation projects. The end benefit of these projects may be undermined by a limited view of all the relevant technology within the ecosystem. In addition, the lapse in capturing all the relevant systems can also result in cost overruns. To remediate the data migration, data platform, and workflow gap issues. This will also create frustration. As I mentioned, training sessions are increased to cover new process workflows. Ultimately, this will have a negative effect on the change management efforts that you'd be engaged in. And that segues nicely into my next topic, which is really about the importance of establishing effective change management strategies, and from my perspective, why it's so important change journeys start at the onset. I'm not sure which change management strategy you aspire to. Personally, I'm a Cotter disciple, and so I like those 7 principles of change management. But from my perspective, all digital process automation projects require end users to go through some type of behavioral change. Transitioning from one way of working to another, this becomes critical in the success of adopting a new system. Many project leaders will incorporate a change management strategy to help users navigate from awareness to interest, evaluation, trial, and then to full adoption. When building change management tactics, whether it be the communication plan or the training, etc., it's important that project leaders think about initiating these tactics at the start of the project. So when building change management tactics, you have to think about the likelihood for greater buy-in at the onset as users feel included in the process and have a say in how the deliverable is formed and shaped. Inclusion at the onset also ensures stakeholders are less likely to challenge the final product and have contextual knowledge on why certain processes and functionality were developed in the first place. When all key stakeholders are part of the change management effort from the start, they are well positioned to serve as change agents pre, during, and even post-launch. So what I'd like to do is cover my last case study with you. And this case study is, again, another level engagement where a new digital process was established for the acquisition of customers. I think I mentioned in the beginning that I've had the benefit of doing these large-scale engagements, both within a financial services context as well as the pharmaceutical context. So acquiring new customers, for those of you who have sales focus, think about what that involves in terms of vetting digital process systems into the equation. So in this effort, a new system and processes were introduced to acquire new banking customers. The business goal was essentially to acquire 1 million customers. The program was designed to align with key elements, the value chain, people, process, strategy, as well as systems. And so, of course, like most large-scale engagements, there were some challenges. First, the system was costly and required buy-in from banking executives and mid-level managers. 2, we anticipated training and adoption of the system and new ways of working would be a major concern. Excuse me. Would the benefits at the end of the day outweigh the level of effort across the various functions? So what did we learn? So from a change management perspective, we learned that creating the right level of communications at the executive level to achieve leadership buy-in is key. Addressing mid-level manager concerns around training is also a key element. Introducing a steady diet of communications to staff, introducing the need for change, and then subsequent communications on what to expect at the engagement, as the engagement evolved, that's also a key element. Well, one other element that I would add, putting on a consulting hat, is the need to engage integrate in change management strategies using different change management tactics. It's not just about communications. It's not about emails. It's also about communication channels, especially in a digital environment. You have the benefit of using, email flashes. You can utilize town halls. You can utilize text messaging. There are various elements that can be integrated as long as you understand the audience, as long as you understand the organization. And so utilizing various communication tactics and channels are an effective change management strategy to ensure not only buy-in, ultimately adoption system. The last element that I want to talk about really is the need to measure. Measuring effectiveness, by defining success through aligned KPIs will drive accountability and results. So the establishment of metrics is a critical component of process automation efforts. We've got to ask ourselves certain questions as we think about the engagement at the onset, and then subsequently develop those metrics to support post-development. So what are those types of questions? You would have to ask yourself at the onset, what does success look like? Can we establish baseline metrics? Can we identify metrics that rationalize the effectiveness of the new system and processes and ensures ongoing accountability with key stakeholders, both from a quantitative as well as a qualitative perspective. What does leadership need to know? What do end users need to see? And what mechanisms can we put in place to not only measure effectiveness, but to facilitate continuous improvement? So these are the fundamental questions that one might ask, and this is not relegated solely to one individual. The business has to ask these questions, but also the stakeholders within the matrix should ask questions from their relative vantage points to be able to come up with a set of metrics that hold matrix partners accountable, but at the same time drives towards the types of outcomes that were anticipated at the onset of the engagement. So if we think about Peter Drucker's old famous saying, if you can't measure it, then you can't improve it. So let's think about that as we think about building certain systems forward. Think about this at the onset and not tail end. So in summary, and if I could do a recap, the drop zone is the ideal location that we all want to enjoy optimal benefits of any digital process automation initiative. So achieving this will require great execution on several elements. I started off with the strategy element because the strategy is key. If you don't have a strategy at the high level, 50,000 foot level, in terms of what you're trying to create, and this is not necessarily strategy that's at the enterprise level, but even at the organization, the functional level, the strategy drives digital process automation engagement. Employing an enterprise mindset will ensure all platforms within the ecosystem are integrated to create a seamless experience for our end users. I can't stress that enough. This is one of those areas where if you miss it, if you're not having the conversations about what are all the different systems that could potentially impact the project that you're working on, this new innovation could come to an interesting standstill without factoring those other systems into the equation. Applying a change management strategy at the onset will accelerate the process of awareness to adoption, creating buy-in and enhancing the organizational culture. I think most, and I heard this even in the previous call about the need to collaborate, to work cross-functionally, but we should think about this within the context of change, right? Think about your end user. Where's their point of context coming into this, and what are the steps that are needed to bring them on this journey to the ultimate conclusion, which is sustainability. How do we make this part of steady state, part of the organizational and operational DNA going? Digital process automation is a continuous effort, requiring a set of baseline metrics to consistently measure effectiveness. Developing key performance indicators periodically with all stakeholders will create a sense of accountability across the organizational metrics. Can't tell you how many times that in different engagements, folks thought that the project was over because you built it. Yes, if you built it, hopefully they will come, but you also have to continuously measure it in order to ensure that it's meeting of the stakeholders, as well as identifying ways to continuously improve and build upon that as the organization improves. And then finally, collaborate. I can't stress that enough. Let's not work in silos. Think about the effort as a cross-functional, cross-matrix, cross-regional exercise that requires the expertise of different folks at the table. Talk, communicate, identify, challenge constructively towards a positive outcome. And with that, I'll open it up to Q&A.
What a fantastic presentation and review of capabilities to be successful, Conrad. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask you to stop showing the presentation screen to the audience so that I can bring my camera back on. And for the audience, again, we have time here for questions. So lots of very interesting questions already submitted here. Keep submitting them. I'll capture the main themes and relay them to Conrad. First one, Conrad, has to do with governance. I mean, in a company like yours, there are millions of things that can be done, right? There are ideas everywhere, and people have different views on what should be prioritized. How do you, at a more holistic level, identify and prioritize the best ideas for digital process automation? How is that governance done in the organization in a way that's manageable?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jose, and I appreciate that. Um, at least within the organizations that I've been a part of, there have been enterprise level governance structures where IT spearheads the effort. So they have the benefit of being able, they've got a vantage point where they can capture all the various IT initiatives, the asks that are being made because they facilitate funding. And so bringing together key executives, business leaders from various functions, along with IT, to have conversations about what are those digital needs, what are those areas of prioritization that align with business strategy, and what in fact should be funded not only in the present year, in the subsequent year, and subsequently in the out years.
Mm-hmm.
But it really starts with conversations at the enterprise level with the right folks, IT, business, in the same room, having conversations about what these are and what are those criteria for prioritization against the business strategy.
And what do you see as typical criteria that emerge for prioritizing this project? So what are some of the things that you think are high in the list when it comes to the key criteria for choosing some projects over others?
Yeah, that's a great question also. It really, so if you think about it, I'm going to speak broadly because I can say from a financial services perspective or a pharma perspective, but really comes down to the strategic imperatives that have been identified. Most organizations have somewhat of a 3 to 5 year plan. And as a result, they've kind of laid out the groundwork in terms of the areas of focus as an enterprise and within specific markets. As a result, those should be the critical drivers. If there's a technology, an innovation, a digital element, they should align to those strategic imperatives. And so everything really comes back to the strategy. Obviously, you're going to have some outliers, some big ticket items that don't necessarily align with immediate strategy, but are more aspirational, and they should be factored in separately. But I would say the primary drivers are those strategic imperatives that have developed, as well as that long-term strategic plan.
Yeah, no, that's very good. So there's strategic alignment. There is, I'm sure, value creation components that you're looking at as well on making those selections. And how do you go? There's probably a lot of some of those projects that emerge. Often they become a little bit like they are strategic aligned. They have potential value, but a lot of them would be classified as solving world hunger as well, where they're like, well, this is, a 3-year digital project is probably obsolete at the very beginning because, so much happens in 3 years, right? So how do you keep that balance between strategic alignment, long-term strategic alignment, and the need to create value today as you progress in that strategic alignment, kind of like an agile approach to this strategic long view? How do you balance that when you're selecting projects?
Yeah, I think that each enterprise has to have an eye on the present as well as an eye on the future. And in doing so, there is that balance between what you have to do realistically to drive the business, as well as creating value, creating innovation down the line. And sometimes it's aspirational. There has to be both commitment at the leadership level, as well as, and when I say commitment, I mean in terms of resources and funding to facilitate not only the things that are set to do from a strategic perspective in the immediate term, but also some of those aspirational elements. And so when you talk about the balance really is driven more so by the commitment of leadership to do both, because you to be constantly test and learn type. Previous panel talked about proof of concepts. There has to be, an innovation engine that's continuously flowing while the business is operating in its steady state, meeting its, primary objectives. So those kind of things have to run in parallel, understanding that you reap benefits from your aspirational goals, even if you don't achieve them. At the very least, you'll learn from them. And those learnings pay dividends in terms of how you drive the business and make decisions going forward.
Another question or maybe theme that has emerged from the audience has to do with capabilities to be developed, to be successful in the long run. There is this proverbial, digital process automation project that's kind of led by some technical person which doesn't really sometimes translate into effective implementation. Sometimes because that individual has the technical skills but does not have the collaborative leadership skills that are necessary. You highlighted that very well in your presentation. Sometimes the opposite is true, may have the collaborative leadership skills but lacks the understanding of the baseline technology and how it is going to apply to our business model. In your practical experience, what do you think are key organizational capabilities to be developed to increase the likelihood of success on digital process automation projects? And I know that there can be so many different things, but if there are like a couple that come to mind that you feel like there are real needs that teams struggle with and they need to develop this, the successful teams have these capabilities and the unsuccessful ones don't, can you draw some sort of distinction about what those capabilities for success look like?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge really comes from how these engagements are structured at the onset. You mentioned it before when you talked about how IT drives it. IT cannot be the driver of these projects because while they have the technological expertise, the business understands the nuances of the business. They understand it. That's why to really come together collaboratively in order to drive any type of process automation, right? So at the onset, figuring out is to be at the table and understanding their various roles to kind of gel together to work towards this particular common. And all too often, in the hands of IT, or you leave it solely in the hands of the business, there will be gaps. And so everyone has to understand that they're bringing expertise to the table. So capability development comes from a committed mindset towards collaboration, appreciation for the different expertise that's brought to the table, and then just leadership giving their buy-in, and as my boss says, allowing talent to do what it does and getting out of the way.
The next question here, I think you appreciate this, especially in an organization like yours, which has been very successful for a very long period of time. It's very traditional, and it's not actually easy to change. I would say that R&D pharmaceuticals is the last place I want to do change because those people are so used to doing projects like over a 7-10 year horizon, and it's like they feel like they're in a separate cluster when it comes to change, improvement, and they think that they're all well taken care of, which is fine, except that they're not, and there is a real need for change and improvement and innovation. So in this very traditional, hard to change settings, especially as I think about pharmaceuticals, that comes to mind, research and development specifically. How do you balance risk versus the need to experiment? Because people are terribly afraid of failure, right? And we know that success is just on the other side of failure. So how do you ingrain? How do you start shifting the culture and start creating maybe mechanisms to allow people to fail forward, to allow people to create an environment where failure is just part of experimentation? And So Simone Soteriedades is asking this question. I think it's a very meaningful question, especially in your context. There's some real cultural barriers that you have to go against there when it comes to fear of failure in organizations to innovate.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think we've had conversations about the importance of overcoming the fear of failure, the need to continuously test and learn, and even there's success in the failures by the things that you learn. I think this is an organizational culture challenge. It's one that has to be driven from the top down, whereas the messaging is really around, we can't be afraid to fail. We can't be afraid to talk about those failures, because in those failures are we going to derive some of our success. And so it's an organizational culture thing from my perspective. I think leaders need to drive that. I think you need test and learn hubs, things like disciplined experimentation, where you pilots, just to see what the outcomes might be and see what is potentially scalable. But they have to happen, because you cannot continue down the path of just doing what you do, staying quiet about the failures, because then the entire enterprise doesn't process, and that's going to hold an organization back instead of propel it forward.
I love the way you frame that as discipline experimentation, because it's not a free for all that I'm just gonna fail because I didn't plan, anything, and I'm failing. And I'm proud of the fact that I'm failing. It is that discipline experimentation that the intended outcome did not materialize, but you have learned a lot from it. And again, as a discipline process, you did all the planning to have the right outcome, but it didn't turn out that way, and then you learn from it. That approach, I think that discipline is an important, combined with the comment you made about the clear support from senior leaders on the experimentation process of the organization. That's not so easy to do, because a lot of those senior leaders, they didn't get to be where they are by failing often, and so it requires a bit of a change in their mindset, and kind of define what the safeguard rails are actually for experimentation. Now let's shift gears a little bit into another topic that came up on the conversation here, and the questions related to you, is that I mean, you're working for a global organization. The priorities at different localities can vary significantly. How you talked about measuring metrics, measuring success, maybe strategic achievement, maybe value creation, combination of strategic imperatives and other factors. But how do you manage a portfolio? Because I think organizations are really good at adding things, but not very good at removing things from their portfolio. So how do you, not only at the metric level for every project, but overall as a portfolio, how do you keep things going so that it doesn't become overwhelming and you just keep adding to the portfolio? Any tips on how to balance and manage that portfolio in the long run? Because I'll tell you, the feedback from the audience, that over time, everybody just kind of gets this bloated portfolio of things to do. Nobody has the courage to kill anything. It either dies a slow death, or it doesn't die, it just stays there lingering, and you keep adding things to the portfolio. Is there something that you have seen that's better or more successful in managing that portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying that with any portfolio, the budget's not infinite, right? So you're working with a finite budget. And so with that said, you can only have so much within the portfolio, right? Because anything over, they're going to force you to cut anyway. But if you're going to do this pragmatically, I would say that there should be some type of a governing body that comes together on a periodic basis that reviews the portfolio against, what are the current strategic needs? Have the strategic needs changed from the year? Make some adjustments. Make some adjustments along the lines of what needs to be done current year, can be deferred, or for that matter, what can be eliminated. So establish your own respective criteria for driving that portfolio. And sometimes it really comes down to, and within a pharmaceutical environment, you have to think about it in terms of therapeutic areas. So things change with the area, competitive threats, new data. There's so many different factors that drive what comes in and rises to the level of versus things that drop down in prioritization based on the change in the external landscape. So you've got to figure out what are those elements that drive decision making in your respective portfolio, and make sure that you're disciplined about reviewing that portfolio, whether basis, a semi-annual basis, just looking at it to make sure that it makes sense. And I think it should align with the financial schedule organization, whereas there are opportunities, projection cycles that allow you to make subtle adjustments so that you're either, giving back dollars, taking, prioritizing, deprioritizing, deferring certain parts of the portfolio so that it's as optimal as possible for a given year.
Conrad, what a great conversation. Love your pragmatic approach, your wonderful experience and insights, but delivered in a very pragmatic way. Lots of great value delivered today to our audience. On behalf of our global audience, I want to thank you for taking the time and sharing your wisdom and expertise with all of us today.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the time that's been provided, and look forward to speaking to everyone again. And please feel free to question me directly on LinkedIn if need be.
Terrific. Ladies and gentlemen, big thanks to Mr. Conrad Banks, leader at Bristol Squibb Myers, and wonderful Bristol Myers Squibb, I'm sorry, with a wonderful presentation on the digital process automation journey at the company and his insights throughout his career. So thank you very much for that, Conrad. We are going to be closing the session now, and for our next session, we're going to be inviting another great leader of digital process automation, a very pragmatic leader. You're going to notice that from our presenters. They are not theoretical book writers. They are doing it. They are true practitioners of the craft that they share with us. And the next, Brent is going to be with us, Brent Weichers, who is a senior director of continuous improvement for North America at ICU Medical. We're going to go from financial services and pharmaceuticals to another area where implementing excellence, innovation, and transformation is a real challenge. And that's, of course, the whole healthcare medical field. There's a lot at stake, tremendous resistance to change in the organizations, levels of bureaucracy and politics that you have to work through. So great lessons from true practitioners in those areas. And next, again, we're going to have the leader, a senior director in one of the premier medical organizations in the United States, ICU Medical. Brent's going to be sharing his expertise with us. He is a lean transformation leader as well, and he'll bring a lot of those perspectives to his talk. So his talk is called Using Excel, Automate the Creation Use of the Standard Work Process. Going back to basics, so many people talking about getting rid of Excel. He's going to be talking about using it to do the standard work in the medical field in a way that creates meaningful transformation. So let's see what he has for us. We'll take a break now, and we will log back on at the top of the hour.